Naomi Harper, a successful black woman, faces intense opposition as she leads a project to build a community center in her hometown. Acts of racism escalate, including hateful vandalism targeting the site, blatant bias from a deputy sheriff, and prejudiced remarks from a group of opposing residents. The story delves into systemic injustice, exposing the pervasive discrimination Naomi must confront while highlighting the infuriating challenges of fighting for progress in a divided community. The smell of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the air as Dr. Naomi Harper stepped out of her sleek black sedan, her heels clicking softly against the cobblestone pavement. It was an unseasonably cool morning, the kind that made you pull your coat a little tighter and savor every sip of warmth in a coffee cup. For Naomi, this stop wasn't a necessity, but a cherished ritual, a moment of simplicity amidst the complexities of her life as the CEO of a groundbreaking biotech firm. Naomi carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned every ounce of her success. Tall and statuesque, she exuded a calm authority that turned heads without her trying. Her deep brown skin glowed against the muted grays of her tailored coat, and her short natural curls framed a face marked by warmth and determination. Despite her accolades, a Forbes cover, multiple honorary doctorates, and a growing reputation as one of the most powerful black women in business, Naomi preferred the modest comforts of life. She lived in the same quiet neighborhood where she grew up, drove herself to work, and made time to chat with her elderly neighbors. The diner she entered was a throwback to another era. Its neon sign flickered with the words, "Ron's Cafe," and the window displayed specials for pancakes and burgers that hadn't changed in decades. Naomi loved the place. It wasn't fancy, but it reminded her of her mother's kitchen, a place where warmth came not from the decor, but from the people. The bell above the door jingled as she walked in, and a few heads turned. Some patrons offered polite nods, while others quickly returned to their coffee cups. Naomi wasn't here for attention, she just wanted a quiet moment before her day began. She slid into a corner booth, tucked her phone into her bag, and pulled out a small notebook. Her to-do list for the day was long: a board meeting at noon, a mentorship call with a group of young entrepreneurs, and a flight out to New York that evening for a conference. But for now, she was focused on the steaming cup of coffee the waitress set in front of her. "Morning, Dr. Harper," the waitress said with a bright smile. "Your usual?" Naomi returned the smile. "Yes, please, Annie, and tell Ron I'm still waiting on that recipe for his apple pie." Annie chuckled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "You know he guards that recipe like gold, but I'll remind him." Naomi's presence in the diner was both familiar and out of place. She was a regular, but the sight of a woman in a coat that probably cost more than the diner's monthly revenue, sitting among truck drivers and retirees, was enough to raise a few eyebrows. Still, most people in the town had come to appreciate her quiet humility. She tipped generously, asked about people's families, and never flaunted her status. As Naomi sipped her coffee, she overheard snippets of conversation from the surrounding tables, talk of last night's high school football game, grumbles about rising gas prices, and whispers about the new development project on the edge of town. The project was one of Naomi's initiatives, a plan to build a state-of-the-art community center and STEM lab for underprivileged youth. It was her way of giving back, though not everyone appreciated it. "You ask me?" a gruff voice muttered from a nearby table. "We don't need no fancy lab. What this town needs is real jobs, not some charity handout." Naomi's ears perked up, but she didn't turn around. She had learned long ago not to engage with every critic. Change was slow, and resistance was inevitable. "Morning, Doc," Ron's booming voice interrupted her thoughts. The owner of the diner, a stocky man with a kind face and an apron that had seen better days, approached her table. "Haven't seen you in a bit. How's life treating you?" Naomi smiled. "Good, Ron, busy but good. How's business?" Ron scratched his head, glancing around the room. Same old, can't complain. You keeping out of trouble?" "Trying my best," Naomi said with a wink. As Ron returned to the kitchen, Naomi felt a shift in the room's energy. The quiet murmurs of conversation seemed to lower, replaced by the unmistakable hum of judgment. She glanced up to see a man standing at the counter, staring at her with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. He was dressed casually in a flannel shirt and jeans, but his demeanor screamed authority. Maybe it was the badge clipped to his belt, or the way he carried himself, but Naomi pegged him as law enforcement immediately. He didn't belong here. Not really. She recognized his face vaguely. A sheriff or deputy from the outskirts of town. His presence in the diner seemed to shift the balance, as if the other patrons were waiting for his cue. "Excuse me," he said, his voice loud enough to cut through the quiet. "Mind if I ask you something?" Naomi looked up, her expression neutral but alert. "Of course. How can I help you?" The man approached her booth, his boots thudding against the floor. He looked her over with an appraising eye, lingering on the bag at her side and the notebook on the table. "You from around here?" he asked, his tone casual but probing. "I grew up here," Naomi replied evenly. "Lived here most of my life." He nodded, but his expression didn't soften. "Haven't seen you around much. What brings you here today?" Naomi's smile didn't waver. "Just grabbing breakfast before work. Is there something I can help you with?" He crossed his arms, glancing around the diner as if looking for backup. "No, ma'am. Just seems unusual to see someone like you in a place like this." "Someone like you." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Naomi felt the eyes of the other patrons on her. Some watching with curiosity, others with discomfort. Annie hesitated near the counter, her tray of plates momentarily forgotten. Naomi straightened in her seat, her voice calm but firm. "Someone like me?" The man's lips twisted into a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You know what I mean. Just making sure everything's all right here." "Everything's fine," Naomi said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "But if you have a specific question, feel free to ask it." For a moment, the two locked eyes, the air between them thick with unspoken tension. Naomi didn't look away, and eventually, the man broke the stare, muttering something under his breath before walking back to the counter. The moment passed, but the unease lingered. Naomi could feel the weight of the encounter pressing down on her, but she refused to let it show. Instead, she picked up her pen and returned to her notes, her calm exterior masking the storm brewing inside. This was nothing new. Naomi had faced prejudice in boardrooms, at airports, even in her own neighborhood. But it never got easier. Each encounter was a reminder that no amount of success could shield her from the biases that still lurked in the hearts of some. As she finished her coffee and signaled for the check, Naomi caught Annie's eye. The waitress gave her a small, apologetic smile, as if to say, "I'm sorry you had to deal with that." Naomi nodded in return, her own smile saying, "It's all right, I'm used to it." But as she stepped out into the crisp morning air, Naomi knew this wouldn't be the end of it. She could feel the story unfolding, the threads of tension weaving into something larger. Whatever came next, she would be ready. The parking lot outside Ron's cafe was quiet, the only sounds the faint hum of traffic in the distance and the occasional chirp of birds overhead. Naomi took a deep breath, letting the crisp air fill her lungs. The encounter inside had rattled her more than she cared to admit, but she pushed the discomfort aside. She was used to encounters like this, each one a reminder of the tightrope she walked as a black woman in positions of power. As she unlocked her car, a voice called out from behind her. "Dr. Harper!" She turned to see the same man from the diner, the deputy, walking toward her with long, deliberate strides. His expression was hard to read, somewhere between curiosity and suspicion. "Yes?" Naomi replied, keeping her tone neutral. "I was just thinking," he said, stopping a few feet away. "You didn't happen to notice anything unusual in the area recently, did you?" Naomi frowned. "Unusual? No, I haven't." The man nodded slowly, as if weighing her answer. "We've had some reports of break-ins around here, mostly targeting cars. Figured I'd ask since you're new around here." The insinuation hung in the air. Naomi's jaw tightened, but she kept her expression composed. "I'm not new around here," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I've lived in this town most of my life." The deputy tilted his head, clearly unconvinced. "Huh, well, just thought I'd check. You never know who might be passing through." Naomi didn't respond immediately. Instead, she met his gaze, letting the silence stretch long enough to make him shift uncomfortably. "Is there anything else, deputy?" she asked finally. He hesitated for a moment, then shook his head. "No, ma'am. You have a good day now." She watched as he walked back to his patrol car, her heart pounding with a mix of anger and disbelief. The insinuation was clear. He saw her as an outsider, someone who didn't belong. It didn't matter that she was one of the most successful people to come out of this town, or that her work was bringing opportunity to the very community he was supposed to protect. To him, she was just another suspicious face. Naomi slid into her car and gripped the steering wheel tightly. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "Keep your head high. Naomi, never let them see you sweat." It was advice she'd carried with her for years, through countless boardroom meetings and tense encounters like this one, but even her mother's wisdom couldn't erase the sting of these moments. Later that morning, Naomi arrived at the development site for the community center. The property was nothing more than an empty lot surrounded by chain-link fencing. But Naomi could already envision what it would become. A place where kids could dream big, where families could gather, where the future of the town could take root. She stepped out of her car and was immediately greeted by Carl Reynolds, the project manager. Carl was a wiry man in his 50s, with a weathered face and a no-nonsense attitude. He tipped his hard hat as Naomi approached. "Morning, Dr. Harper," he said. "We're just about to go over the plans for the foundation. You ready?" "Always," Naomi said with a smile. As they walked toward the makeshift office trailer, Naomi noticed a group of workers standing near the fence. They weren't part of the construction crew. Judging by their clothes, they were local residents. One of them, a burly man with a trucker cap, was gesturing angrily at the site. "This is a waste of space," the man shouted as Naomi and Carl approached. "We don't need no damn community center. What we need are jobs." Naomi stopped in her tracks, her smile fading. Carl stepped forward, his hands raised in a calming gesture. "Morning, folks," he said. "I understand your concerns, but this project is about creating opportunities for the community. There'll be jobs during construction, and the center itself will bring in—" "Don't give me that crap," the man interrupted. "This is just another handout. What about the factory jobs we lost? What about the people who need real work?" Naomi stepped forward, her voice calm but resolute. "I hear you," she said, addressing the man directly. "This center isn't just a handout, it's an investment in the future. It's about giving kids the tools they need to build careers, start businesses, and bring new opportunities to this town." The man sneered. "Easy for you to say you're sitting pretty while the rest of us are scraping by." Naomi felt the sting of his words, but didn't let it show. "I understand your frustration," she said. "And I want to work with you to find solutions that help everyone. This center is just one piece of the puzzle." The man didn't reply. He simply spat on the ground and walked away, muttering under his breath. The others followed, their glares lingering on Naomi as they disappeared down the street. Carl sighed, shaking his head. "Don't mind them," he said. "There's always going to be people who resist change." Naomi nodded, though her chest felt tight. "Let's get back to work." By midday, Naomi found herself at the courthouse, attending a zoning hearing for the community center. The room was packed with local officials, residents, and a few journalists. Naomi sat near the front, her notebook open, and her pen poised. She knew this hearing would be contentious. There had been pushback from some members of the town council who felt the project was unnecessary. The meeting started smoothly enough, with presentations from engineers and planners. But as the discussion turned to public comments, the tone shifted. A middle-aged woman in a tailored blazer stood up, her voice sharp and clipped. "I'm all for helping the community," she said, "but I have to question the priorities here. Why are we spending taxpayer dollars on a project like this when our roads are falling apart and our schools are underfunded?" Naomi raised her hand to respond, but before she could speak, another voice chimed in. "This whole thing is just a vanity project," a man in a plaid shirt said. "It's not about helping the community, it's about making certain people look good." Naomi felt the heat rising in her chest. She stood, her movements deliberate, and addressed the room. "With all due respect," she began, her voice steady, "this project is about creating opportunities that this town desperately needs. It's about giving our kids a chance to succeed in fields like technology and engineering. This isn't about me, it's about all of us." The woman in the blazer scoffed. "And what makes you qualified to decide what this town needs?" Naomi met her gaze, unflinching. "I grew up here, I've seen the challenges our community faces firsthand, and I've spent my career working to create opportunities for underserved communities. This project isn't just an idea, it's a solution." The room fell silent for a moment, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Naomi's words hung in the air, a quiet challenge to anyone who doubted her resolve. But as the hearing continued, Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that the resistance wasn't just about the project, it was about her. Her presence, her authority, her identity. She had fought to get to this point. But the road ahead was still fraught with obstacles. The tension continued to mount, each encounter adding to Naomi's sense of unease. The diner, the development site, the courthouse, each place seemed to echo the same question. Who does she think she is? Naomi knew the answer. She was someone who wouldn't back down. Someone who refused to let prejudice dictate her path. And as the day wore on, she felt her resolve harden. Whatever was coming next, she would face it head-on. Naomi's phone buzzed on her desk, dragging her focus from the zoning documents she was reviewing. She glanced at the screen and saw Carl's name. "We've got a problem," Carl said without preamble. His voice was tight, carrying an edge of urgency. "You'd better get down here." "What's going on?" Naomi asked, already rising from her chair. "Just come. You need to see this." Naomi grabbed her coat and headed for the development site. The drive felt longer than it should have, her mind racing with possibilities. When she arrived, her heart sank. A group of people stood clustered near the chain-link fence, their voices loud and angry. Spray-painted across the construction sign were the words, "Go back where you came from," in bold red letters. The paint dripped down the sign like blood, a stark and ugly message. Carl met her at the gate, his expression grim. "We found it this morning, the crew's shaken up, and some of them are talking about walking off the job." Naomi's stomach churned, but she forced herself to stay calm. She walked closer to the sign, her heels crunching on the gravel, and studied the hateful words. A part of her wanted to scream, to let the anger bubbling inside her erupt, but she knew better. This wasn't the time for emotion, it was the time for action. "Have you called the police?" she asked. Carl hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, they're on their way. But Naomi, I don't know if they're going to take this seriously." Naomi nodded, understanding his doubt. She had seen it before: hesitation, excuses, and dismissals when it came to addressing acts of hate. But this time, she wasn't going to let it slide. The squad car arrived 20 minutes later, and Naomi wasn't surprised to see Deputy Daniels step out. His expression was unreadable as he approached the group, but Naomi caught the flicker of something in his eyes when he saw her. "Well, this is something," Daniels said, his tone light, almost casual. "What do we have here?" Naomi stepped forward, her voice measured. "Vandalism, a hate crime. Whoever did this is trying to intimidate the people working on this project." Daniels nodded slowly, pulling out a notepad. "Hate crime, you say could just be some kids messing around, you know how teenagers get." Naomi's jaw tightened. "This isn't a prank, Deputy. Look at what they wrote. This was deliberate." Daniels shrugged, jotting down a few notes. "I'll file a report, but unless someone saw something or we have surveillance footage, there's not much we can do." "You can investigate," Naomi pressed. "You can talk to the neighbors, check for cameras nearby, do your job." Daniel's eyes hardened, his casual demeanor slipping. "Now, hold on, I said I'd file a report, no need to get pushy." The tension between them was palpable, and Naomi felt the weight of the onlookers' stares. She could see the crew members whispering among themselves, their unease growing. If she didn't handle this carefully, she risked losing their trust. "Deputy," Naomi said, softening her tone, but not her resolve, "this isn't just about graffiti, this is about sending a message that this kind of behavior won't be tolerated. If we ignore it, we're giving them permission to do worse." Daniels held her gaze for a moment, before finally nodding. "I'll see what I can do." It wasn't the commitment Naomi wanted, but it was better than nothing. As Daniels walked back to his car, she turned to Carl and the crew. "We're not stopping," she said, her voice firm. "This project is going to happen, and no amount of hate is going to derail it. If anyone has concerns, I'm here to listen, but we're moving forward." The workers exchanged glances, and one of them, a young man named Julio, stepped forward. "We've got your back, Dr. Harper," he said. "We're not letting them scare us off." Naomi smiled, a flicker of hope piercing through her frustration. Thank you. That means more than you know. The story hit the local news that evening. The image of the vandalized sign plastered across television screens and social media feeds. Naomi's phone buzzed non-stop with messages, some offering support, others less kind. Among them was a text from her assistant, Mitchell. Mitchell. You've got a meeting with the mayor tomorrow morning. Looks like this thing's gaining traction. Naomi stared at the message, feeling the weight of what was to come. The mayor had been lukewarm about the project from the start, and she knew this latest incident would give him an excuse to question its viability. She couldn't let that happen. The next morning, Naomi sat across from Mayor Hall in his wood-paneled office. He was a wiry man with thinning hair and a perpetually furrowed brow, the kind of politician who tried to play every side without committing to any. This situation is unfortunate, Hall began, folding his hands on the desk. But I have to ask, do you think this project is worth all this trouble? Naomi raised an eyebrow. Worth it, Mr. Mayor. This project is about creating opportunities for people who have been overlooked for far too long. If we back down now, we're letting hate win. Hall sighed, leaning back in his chair. I get that, I do, but you have to understand the position I'm in. People are saying this project is divisive, that it's causing more harm than good. People like who? Naomi pressed. The same ones who think it's okay to spray paint hate speech on a construction sign, or the ones who would rather ignore the systemic problems in this town than do something to fix them. Hall shifted uncomfortably. Look, I'm not saying we should cancel it. I'm just saying we need to tread carefully, maybe delay things until the tension dies down. Naomi felt her patience slipping. With all due respect, Mayor, delay is just another word for defeat. If we wait, we're telling the people who did this that they've won. Is that the message you want to send? Hall opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Naomi's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and saw Mitchell's name. Excuse me, she said, standing. I need to take this. Stepping into the hallway, she answered the call. Mitchell, what's going on? You need to get back to the site, Mitchell said, his voice tight. There's a crowd gathering, it's getting heated. Naomi's chest tightened. I'm on my way. When Naomi arrived at the site, the scene was worse than she imagined. A group of protesters had gathered outside the fence, their signs and voices blending into a cacophony of anger. Some carried banners that read, "No handouts," and "Our town, our rules." Others shouted insults, their words cutting through the air like knives. Naomi spotted Carl near the gate, his face pale as he tried to keep the crew calm. She made her way over to him, her heart pounding. What happened? She asked. They just showed up, Carl said. Started yelling, waving those signs. A couple of them tried to get onto the site, but we managed to keep them out. Naomi turned to face the crowd, her mind racing. She knew she couldn't let this escalate further, but she also couldn't back down. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward, raising her hands to signal for quiet. The shouting subsided slightly, enough for her voice to carry. I understand you're upset, she began. But this project isn't about taking anything away from you, it's about building something for all of us, something this town desperately needs. A man near the front stepped forward, his face red with anger. We don't need you coming in here and telling us what's best for our town. I'm not telling you, Naomi said, her voice steady. I'm showing you. This center isn't just a building, it's a chance for our kids to dream bigger, to achieve more. If we work together, we can make this happen. The man sneered. You think we're just gonna roll over and let you ruin everything? Before Naomi could respond, a loud voice cut through the crowd. She's not ruining anything, you are. Naomi turned to see Julio standing behind her, his expression fierce. He stepped forward, his voice rising above the murmurs. Dr. Harper is doing more for this town than any of you ever have. If you can't see that, then maybe you're the problem. The crowd erupted again, the tension reaching a fever pitch. Naomi felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but she refused to back away. This was it. The tipping point, and she was ready to stand her ground. The crowd outside the development site surged, their shouts growing louder, as Naomi stood her ground. The signs they waved, the venom in their voices, it was all designed to intimidate, to make her question whether the fight was worth it. But Naomi refused to flinch. Julio's words had stirred a fire in her, but they had also escalated the situation. The man at the front of the crowd, the one who had challenged her earlier, clenched his fists and stepped closer. "Big words from someone who doesn't understand how this town works," he spat, his voice thick with disdain. "You think you can waltz in here and tell us what we need? You don't belong here." The words hit Naomi like a blow, not because they were new, but because they were so painfully familiar. She glanced at Julio, who looked ready to charge forward, and held up a hand to stop him. The last thing she needed was for this to spiral out of control. "I belong here as much as anyone," Naomi said, her voice calm but firm. "This is my town too, and I'm not going anywhere." The man sneered, looking over his shoulder at the crowd. "You hear that she thinks she can just take over, like we're supposed to fall in line." The crowd roared in agreement, and Naomi's heart pounded. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw a police cruiser pull up. The sight of Deputy Daniels stepping out of the car didn't bring relief. It only heightened her anxiety. Daniels approached slowly, his hand resting on the belt that held his gun and baton. His expression was unreadable as he scanned the crowd, then fixed his gaze on Naomi. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice loud enough to carry over the noise. Naomi stepped forward before anyone else could speak. "Deputy, we're dealing with a group of protesters disrupting the construction site they're trespassing, and some of them have made threats." Daniels raised an eyebrow, looking over at the protesters. "Threats, huh? I don't see anything too serious, just folks exercising their right to free speech." "This isn't free speech," Naomi said, her frustration slipping into her tone. "This is harassment. They've vandalized the property, and now they're trying to intimidate the workers." Daniels tilted his head, giving her a slow, measured look. "You're awfully quick to play the victim, Dr. Harper. Maybe if you hadn't stirred things up with this project, folks wouldn't be so upset." Naomi froze, her disbelief giving way to a simmering anger. "Are you blaming me for this?" "I'm just saying," Daniels replied, shrugging. "You came in here, made a lot of changes, and now people are reacting. Actions have consequences." The crowd murmured in agreement, emboldened by the deputy's words. Naomi felt the weight of their stares, the heat of their animosity, and knew she was being backed into a corner. Mitchell arrived just as the tension reached a boiling point. He pushed his way through the crowd, his tie askew and his face flushed with urgency. "Naomi," he called, his voice cutting through the noise. "What's going on?" "Perfect timing," Naomi muttered as he reached her side. She quickly filled him in, keeping her voice low. Mitchell's face darkened with concern. "This isn't good," he said. "We need to de-escalate before someone gets hurt." "I'm trying," Naomi replied, "but Daniels isn't helping." Mitchell glanced at the deputy, who was now talking to the man leading the protest. Their body language was casual, almost friendly, and it made Mitchell's stomach turn. He leaned closer to Naomi. "Daniels isn't on our side," he said. "You can see it, he's feeding into their anger." Naomi nodded. "I know, but we can't afford to lose control." She turned back to the crowd, raising her voice over the din. "This project is for the benefit of the entire community," she said, her tone steady. "We're not taking anything away from you. We're building something that will help your kids, your families." "Lies," someone shouted. "You're just here to make yourself look good." Naomi's fists clenched at her sides, but she forced herself to stay composed. "I've lived here my whole life. This is my home too, and I'm doing this because I believe in what we can achieve together." Before she could say more, Daniel stepped forward, his hand raised to silence the crowd. "All right, that's enough," he said. "Everyone needs to clear out before this gets out of hand." The man leading the protest pointed a finger at Naomi. "She's the one causing the problem. She doesn't respect this town or the people in it." Daniels hesitated, then turned to Naomi. "Maybe you should step back, Dr. Harper. Let me handle this." Naomi stared at him, incredulous. "Step back? This is my project. I'm not going to stand by while people try to tear it down." Daniel's expression hardened. "I'm asking you nicely. Don't make this more difficult than it has to be." The threat in his tone was unmistakable, and Naomi felt her heart race. She glanced at Mitchell, who gave her a look that said, "Be careful." But Naomi couldn't back down, not now. The situation spiraled faster than anyone anticipated. As the protesters grew louder, one of them stepped forward and began shaking the fence. The workers inside the site backed away nervously, and Carl shouted for everyone to stay calm. But the tension was too thick, the anger too palpable. Daniels moved toward the fence, yelling for the man to stop, but it was too late. The fence toppled forward, landing with a crash that sent dust and debris flying. The crowd surged, their shouts turning into chaos. Naomi found herself shoved backward, her heels slipping on the gravel. "Naomi!" Mitchell shouted, grabbing her arm and pulling her upright. "We have to get out of here." "No," Naomi said, her voice firm despite the panic rising in her chest. "I'm not running." The crowd began spilling onto the construction site, their frustration boiling over into physical action. Julio and the other workers tried to hold their ground, but they were outnumbered. Tools clattered to the ground as people shoved their way past the barriers. Daniels pulled out his radio, barking orders for backup, but his actions felt half-hearted, as if he was more concerned with appearing in control than actually restoring order. Naomi realized with a sinking feeling that she couldn't count on him. She turned to Mitchell, her mind racing. "Get the media here," she said. "Call every reporter you know. If they see this, if the world sees this, they can't ignore it." Mitchell hesitated, then nodded. "I'm on it." As he ran off, Naomi turned back to the chaos, her resolve hardening. She stepped forward, her voice rising above the noise. "Enough!" she shouted. The sheer force of her tone stopped some of the protesters in their tracks. They turned to look at her, their expressions a mix of anger and surprise. "This isn't who we are," Naomi said, her voice steady, despite the pounding of her heart. "This town is better than this. We solve problems by working together, not by tearing each other apart." The crowd wavered, their momentum faltering. But before Naomi could press further, a voice shouted from the back, "Arrest her!" Daniels looked up, his hand already on his baton. He hesitated for a moment, then began moving toward Naomi. "Deputy," Naomi said, her voice sharp. "Don't do this. You know I haven't broken any laws." Daniel's jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he might back down. But then he reached for his handcuffs. "You're causing a disturbance, Dr. Harper," he said. "I'm going to have to take you in." Naomi stood her ground, her heart pounding. She knew this was a turning point, the moment where she could either retreat or take a stand. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, her voice calm but unyielding. "If you want to arrest me, go ahead. But you'll have to explain to the world why you're arresting someone for trying to build something better." The crowd watched in stunned silence as Daniels hesitated, his hand hovering over his cuffs. The tension was electric, every second stretching into eternity. Naomi felt the weight of their eyes on her, the unspoken question hanging in the air. What happens next? Naomi stood motionless as Deputy Daniels advanced, the handcuffs dangling in his grip like a challenge. Around them, the crowd's murmur rose into a cacophony of voices, some urging Daniels to act, others shouting for restraint. The toppled fence and scattered tools painted a stark picture of chaos, but Naomi refused to let it define her fight. "Step aside, Dr. Harper," Daniels said, his voice steady but cold. "You're obstructing an investigation." "An investigation into what, Deputy?" Naomi replied, her voice calm but cutting. "Trespassers disrupting a lawful project, or are you investigating the people trying to intimidate me and my team with hate speech?" Daniels paused, a flicker of discomfort crossing his face. "This situation has gotten out of hand, and you're at the center of it. For the safety of everyone here, I'm asking you to come with me." "You're not arresting me because of safety," Naomi said, stepping forward. "You're doing this because you don't like that I'm challenging the status quo, because I won't stay silent and let people like you dictate who belongs here." The crowd grew quiet, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Daniel's jaw tightened, and his hand flexed around the cuffs. "This isn't about me," he said. "You've stirred up trouble, and now you're facing the consequences." Naomi's voice sharpened. "The only trouble here is your refusal to hold the real offenders accountable. This is about you protecting them because you agree with them, isn't it?" Daniels's face reddened, and his composure cracked. "Watch your mouth," he snapped. "You don't know anything about me." "I know enough," Naomi said, her gaze unwavering. "I know you stood by while people defaced this site with hate speech. I know you dismissed their actions as harmless, and I know you're more interested in silencing me than addressing the real problem." Daniels stepped closer, his towering frame trying to intimidate. "You think you're better than everyone here because you've got money and power, but I see through you. You're nothing but a—" "Enough!" a voice shouted from behind. The crowd parted, and Mitchell appeared, flanked by 2 reporters and a cameraman. The red recording light on the camera was like a beacon, drawing everyone's attention. Mitchell's face was a mix of anger and determination as he marched forward. "Deputy Daniels," Mitchell said loudly, "are you seriously about to arrest Dr. Harper for standing on her own property because the world is going to want an explanation?" Daniels froze, his eyes darting to the camera. The tension in his posture shifted from aggression to hesitation. He knew the implications of being recorded in this moment. His actions now had a much larger audience. "This isn't what it looks like," Daniels said, his voice faltering. "I'm trying to maintain order." "Then why aren't you arresting the people who caused this chaos?" Mitchell asked, gesturing to the protesters. "They're the ones trespassing and destroying property." Daniels's face flushed, and he turned to the crowd as if searching for support. But the protesters had gone quiet, their confidence waning under the scrutiny of the camera. Naomi took a step forward, her voice clear and steady. "Deputy, you have a choice to make. You can do your job and hold the right people accountable, or you can prove to everyone here that you're complicit in their hate." The weight of her words pressed down on Daniels, and for a moment, he looked as if he might lash out. But then, a figure emerged from the crowd. Julio, his face resolute as he held up his phone. "I've got everything on video too," Julio said. "Every word, every action, you're not going to get away with this." Daniel's expression darkened, his fists clenching at his sides. But the growing presence of cameras and witnesses left him no room to maneuver. Finally, he lowered the cuffs and turned away. "This isn't over," he muttered, retreating toward his cruiser. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Daniels climbed into his car and drove away, his tires kicking up a cloud of dust. Naomi stood tall, her chest heaving as the adrenaline coursed through her. She had won this battle, but the war was far from over. The protesters began to disperse, their energy deflated. Some muttered angry words as they walked away, while others avoided eye contact altogether. Naomi turned to Julio, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft but sincere. Julio nodded. "You didn't back down, so neither will we." Mitchell approached, his face a mixture of relief and worry. "That was risky. Naomi Daniels could have arrested you, cameras or not." "I couldn't let him intimidate us," Naomi replied. "This project is too important." The reporters approached next, their microphones extended. "Dr. Harper," one of them asked, "how do you feel about what just happened? Do you think this incident will impact the future of the project?" Naomi took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "What happened here today is a reminder of the challenges we face when we try to create change, but it's also proof that we can't back down. This project isn't just about a building, it's about showing this community what's possible when we work together, and I'm not giving up." The reporters nodded, jotting down her words as the camera continued to roll. Naomi felt the weight of the moment, knowing her response would be seen far beyond this small town. As the sight quieted, Naomi and Mitchell sat on the edge of the trailer steps, the sun beginning to dip below the horizon. The day had been exhausting, both physically and emotionally, but Naomi felt a sense of clarity she hadn't experienced in weeks. "You handled that like a pro," Mitchell said, breaking the silence. "I don't know how you kept your cool." Naomi smiled faintly. "Years of practice, and knowing that losing my temper wouldn't solve anything." Mitchell hesitated, then added, "You know this isn't over, right? Daniels and the others. They're not going to let this go." "I know," Naomi said, "but neither will I." The resolve in her voice was unshakable, and Mitchell nodded, a hint of admiration in his expression. "Whatever comes next, you've got me in your corner." "Thank you," Naomi replied. "That means more than you know." As the last rays of sunlight bathed the site in gold, Naomi felt the weight of the day begin to lift. She had faced down hate, stood her ground, and refused to be silenced. The battle was far from over, but she was ready for whatever came next. The day after the chaos at the development site, Naomi received a summons to attend an emergency town council meeting. The message was vague, but Naomi could sense what it meant. Daniels and his allies weren't finished. They would use this meeting as a platform to discredit her, to paint her as the problem rather than the solution. By the time she arrived at the courthouse, the air was thick with anticipation. Protesters had gathered outside, their chants echoing against the brick walls. Some held signs in support of Naomi and the community center, while others carried messages of resistance, their anger scrawled in bold, accusatory letters. Inside, the council chamber was packed. Naomi spotted Mitchell near the back, nodding encouragement as she took her seat at the front. To her left sat the mayor, his expression a careful mask of neutrality. Across from her was Deputy Daniels, his uniform crisp and his posture rigid. His presence at the meeting was unusual. Law enforcement rarely attended council sessions, but it was clear he intended to make a statement. The chair of the council, an older man with silver hair and a weary expression, banged his gavel. "This emergency meeting is called to order. We're here to address the escalating tension surrounding the development project, led by Dr. Naomi Harper." Naomi sat up straighter, her hands folded in her lap. She could feel the weight of every gaze in the room, some hostile, others hopeful. This was her moment to stand her ground. "Deputy Daniels," the chair continued, "I understand you have concerns about recent events. Please share your perspective." Daniels rose, his movements deliberate. He scanned the room, pausing briefly to meet Naomi's gaze before turning to the council. "Over the past few weeks, I've witnessed growing unrest in our community," he began. "The incident at the construction site yesterday was a direct result of Dr. Harper's divisive actions. Her project has disrupted the peace, and her refusal to cooperate with law enforcement has only made things worse." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Naomi clenched her fists under the table, but kept her face neutral. Daniels continued, his voice gaining strength. "I've tried to maintain order, but Dr. Harper has shown a blatant disregard for authority. She's escalated tensions at every turn, and her actions have put this town at risk. I believe it's time we reconsider whether this project is in the best interest of our community." Naomi stood before the chair could respond. "May I address these accusations?" The chair hesitated, then nodded. "You may." Naomi turned to face the audience, her voice steady but firm. "Deputy Daniels has accused me of being divisive, of putting this town at risk. But let's be clear about what's really happening here. The unrest we've seen isn't because of the community center, it's because there are people in this town who fear change. They see progress as a threat, not an opportunity." Daniels scoffed, but Naomi didn't falter. "Deputy Daniels wants you to believe that I'm the problem, but his actions tell a different story. Yesterday, he ignored vandalism on the construction site and dismissed it as harmless. He allowed protesters to trespass and threaten my team. And when I stood my ground, he tried to arrest me, not because I broke the law, but because I refused to be intimidated." The room fell silent, the weight of her words pressing down on everyone present. Naomi turned to Daniels, her gaze unwavering. "Deputy, you've shown time and again that your bias clouds your judgment. You don't serve this community. You serve your own prejudices, and it's time for that to end." Daniels' face darkened, and he stepped forward, his voice sharp. "You don't know anything about me, Dr. Harper. You walk in here with your money and your ideas, acting like you're better than the rest of us. You don't care about this town, you care about your legacy." Naomi felt the anger rise in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. "You're wrong, Deputy. I care deeply about this town, so much that I've dedicated my time, resources, and energy to making it better, and I'm not going to let you or anyone else derail that." Daniels smirked, his eyes glinting with malice. "You think you're untouchable, don't you? But I know the truth. I've spoken to people. Former colleagues of yours, residents who've seen the way you operate. You're not as clean as you pretend to be." The accusation hung in the air, and Naomi felt a flicker of doubt, but she quickly pushed it aside. "If you have evidence to back up these claims, present it. Otherwise, stop hiding behind baseless accusations." Daniels hesitated, his confidence faltering. The silence in the room grew heavier, and Naomi seized the moment. "The real question here isn't about me, it's about leadership," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "Do we want leaders who stoke fear and division, or do we want leaders who build bridges and create opportunities? This project is about the future of our town, and I refuse to let hate dictate its outcome." Applause broke out in the audience, and Naomi felt a surge of strength. But the moment was short-lived. Daniels stepped forward again, his face red with frustration. "You think you've won, Dr. Harper. This isn't over. You can hide behind your speeches, but I'll find the truth. And when I do, everyone will see you for what you really are." Naomi met his gaze, her expression calm but resolute. "Go ahead, deputy. Do your worst because I have nothing to hide." The chair banged his gavel, calling for order. "That's enough. We'll deliberate on this matter and issue a decision in due course." Naomi nodded, her heart pounding as she returned to her seat. She could feel Daniel's glare burning into her back, but she refused to look at him. This battle wasn't over, but she had made her stand, and she wasn't backing down. As Naomi left the courthouse, the crowd outside erupted into cheers. Supporters surrounded her, their voices filled with hope and determination. Mitchell appeared at her side, a smile breaking through his usually serious demeanor. "You were incredible," he said. "Daniels didn't know what hit him." Naomi smiled faintly. "This isn't about him, it's about the people who believe in what we're building." Mitchell nodded, but his expression grew serious. "You know he's not going to stop, right? He'll dig for anything he can use against you." "Let him," Naomi replied. "I'm not afraid of the truth." But as she walked toward her car, a shadow of uncertainty lingered. Daniel's parting words echoed in her mind, a reminder that the fight was far from over. She had faced him down today, but tomorrow would bring new challenges, and she had to be ready. The fallout from the emergency council meeting was swift and decisive. Within hours, clips of Naomi's confrontation with Deputy Daniels had gone viral, spreading across social media and news outlets like wildfire. The footage captured Daniels' thinly veiled prejudice and Naomi's powerful rebuttal, painting a stark contrast between his hostility and her composed resolve. By the next morning, the town was buzzing with activity. Supporters of the community center rallied outside Naomi's office, holding signs that read, "Justice for all," and "Build bridges, not walls." Meanwhile, Daniels found himself at the center of a growing firestorm. Daniels held accountable. A week after the meeting, the state's attorney general announced an investigation into Daniels' conduct. It turned out Julio's video, and others captured more than just the confrontation. They showed Daniels ignoring the protesters' trespassing, dismissing the vandalism as harmless, and attempting to arrest Naomi without cause. The Attorney General's office stated that Daniels' actions appeared to be part of a pattern of discriminatory behavior, and they promised a full review of his record. The announcement sent shockwaves through the town. Residents, who had long felt marginalized, began to speak out, sharing their own stories of mistreatment. Former colleagues of Daniels came forward, corroborating claims of bias and misconduct. Even some of his allies began to distance themselves, recognizing that defending him would be political suicide. Daniels himself tried to mount a defense, giving interviews where he claimed he was the victim of a smear campaign. But the evidence against him was overwhelming, and his words rang hollow. Within a month, he was placed on administrative leave, pending the outcome of the investigation. His once unshakable authority crumbled, and the man who had tried to silence Naomi was now silenced himself. The community center breaks ground. With Daniels out of the picture, the development project moved forward at full speed. The town council, under immense public pressure, approved the final permits for the community center. Construction resumed, and the site, that had once been a battleground, became a symbol of hope and progress. Naomi stood at the groundbreaking ceremony, a hard hat perched on her head and a shovel in her hands. She looked out at the crowd gathered before her, friends, neighbors, workers, and families, all united in their support. Mitchell stood nearby, his clipboard in hand, but his smile uncharacteristically wide. As Naomi stepped up to the podium, the crowd fell silent. She took a moment to collect herself, letting the significance of the moment sink in. "This project is more than just a building," she began. "It's a promise. A promise that we will not let hate or fear dictate our future. It's proof that when we stand together, we can overcome anything." The crowd erupted into applause, and Naomi felt a surge of emotion. This was the culmination of months of struggle, and though the road had been difficult, it was worth every step. Personal growth and reflection. In the weeks that followed, Naomi found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. She thought about the moments when she had felt overwhelmed, the nights when she had questioned whether she could keep going, but she also thought about the people who had stood by her, the workers who refused to quit, the supporters who rallied outside her office, and Mitchell, whose quiet dedication had kept her grounded. One evening, as she sat on her porch with a cup of tea, Naomi pulled out her notebook. On its pages were the plans for the community center, carefully sketched and annotated. She smiled, thinking about how those plans had grown from a simple idea into a reality. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from Julio. "Julio, wanted you to see this. We're getting applications for the first STEM classes already. Kids are excited. This is because of you." Naomi's heart swelled with pride. She typed a quick response. "Naomi, this is because of us. Thank you for believing in this project." As she set the phone down, Naomi felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in months. The fight wasn't over. There was still work to be done, and she knew there would be new challenges ahead. But for the first time, she felt like she had won a piece of the battle. The ripple effect. The impact of Naomi's fight extended far beyond the town. Her story was featured in national news outlets, sparking conversations about systemic racism, community development, and the power of grassroots activism. Organizations reached out, offering support and resources to expand the scope of the project. Donations poured in, allowing the community center to add new features, including a mentorship program and a scholarship fund. The town itself began to change. Inspired by Naomi's determination, other residents started advocating for reforms, from better policing practices to increased investment in underserved neighborhoods. The movement Naomi had sparked was growing, and its momentum felt unstoppable. A lingering challenge. But not everyone was ready to embrace change. A small but vocal group continued to resist, their anger simmering beneath the surface. Rumors swirled about efforts to undermine Naomi's work. From frivolous lawsuits to anonymous threats, Naomi knew she couldn't let her guard down, but she also knew she wasn't alone. Mitchell had already begun assembling a legal team to handle any challenges that arose. Julio had stepped into a leadership role at the construction site, ensuring the project stayed on track. And the community, galvanized by Naomi's example, was ready to push back against anyone who tried to stand in their way. A glimpse of the future. One afternoon, as construction neared completion, Naomi stood on the site, watching the workers put the finishing touches on the center's facade. The building was beautiful, modern yet welcoming, with large windows that let in natural light and a mural painted by local artists adorning one wall. A group of children wandered onto the site, their faces lighting up as they took in the space. One little girl tugged on Naomi's sleeve, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Is this place for us?" she asked. Naomi knelt to the girl's level, smiling. "It's for all of us. What do you want to do when you grow up?" The girl beamed. "I want to be a scientist." Naomi's chest tightened with emotion. "You'll be a great one," she said. "And this place will help you get there." As the girl ran off to join her friends, Naomi stood, her gaze sweeping over the site. The road ahead was still uncertain, but in that moment, she felt a deep sense of purpose. This wasn't just about a building, it was about creating a legacy of hope and possibility. Naomi turned to Mitchell, who had been watching from a distance. "Ready for the next project?" she asked, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. Mitchell laughed. "You don't take a break, do you?" "There's no time for breaks," Naomi said. "We've got work to do." Naomi stood on the steps of the newly completed community center, the building gleaming in the early morning light. It was the culmination of months of struggle, countless sleepless nights, and moments of doubt that had threatened to consume her. But as she watched families gather at the entrance, their faces alight with curiosity and hope, she felt an overwhelming sense of fulfillment. This building was more than bricks and mortar. It was a testament to resilience, to the power of standing firm in the face of adversity. Naomi had been tested in ways she hadn't anticipated, her resolve pushed to its limits. Yet, she had emerged stronger, with a renewed sense of purpose and a deeper understanding of the strength within her community. Reflecting on the journey. In the quiet moments after the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Naomi found herself sitting alone in the center's sunlit atrium. She thought about the woman she had been at the start of this journey, driven and confident, but perhaps a bit naive about the challenges she would face. She hadn't anticipated the depth of resistance, the vehemence with which some people would fight to maintain the status quo, but she had learned. She had learned that progress wasn't just about having a vision, it was about standing your ground when others tried to tear that vision apart. She had learned that true leadership wasn't about perfection, but about perseverance, and the ability to inspire others to believe in something greater than themselves. More than anything, Naomi had learned that change was never achieved in isolation. It was the collective strength of her allies, the workers who refused to give up, the community members who rallied in her defense, and the countless individuals who lent their voices to the cause, that had made this victory possible. Broader implications. The story of the community center had reached far beyond the borders of Naomi's small town. It had become a symbol of the broader fight against systemic racism, inequality, and abuse of power. The investigation into Deputy Daniel's conduct revealed a troubling pattern, one that mirrored issues faced in communities across the country. His suspension and eventual resignation sent a powerful message. Those who perpetuate injustice would no longer be shielded by the systems they exploited. But the work was far from over. Naomi knew that the struggles she had faced were not unique. They were rooted in centuries of systemic oppression that wouldn't be dismantled overnight. The community center was a step forward, but it was only one piece of a much larger puzzle. Real change would require sustained effort, education, and an unyielding commitment to justice. Naomi's fight had sparked something larger than herself. Local businesses began reassessing their hiring practices. Schools implemented programs to address bias, and community leaders initiated dialogues about equity and inclusion. The town wasn't perfect. There were still voices of resistance, still remnants of the old ways of thinking, but the seeds of progress had been planted. Inspiration for the future. Naomi knew the road ahead would be challenging, but she also knew it was worth traveling. As she watched children explore the center's new STEM lab, their eyes wide with wonder, she felt a renewed sense of hope. This was why she had fought so hard, not for recognition, but for the opportunity to create a better future. The little girl who had told Naomi she wanted to be a scientist came running up to her, holding a model rocket she had just built. "Look, Dr. Harper," she exclaimed, her face glowing with pride. "Do you think I can make a real one someday?" Naomi knelt down, her smile soft and full of conviction. "I know you can, and when you do, I want to be there to see it." The girl beamed and ran back to her group, leaving Naomi with a heart full of gratitude. These were the moments that made the struggle worthwhile, the moments when she could see the impact of her work in the joy and confidence of the next generation. A call to action. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the community center, Naomi stood on the steps once more, this time addressing a crowd of supporters and allies. Her voice carried a mix of gratitude and determination as she spoke. "This center represents what we can achieve when we refuse to back down," she said. "It's proof that change is possible, even in the face of fear and resistance. But let me be clear, this is just the beginning. There is still so much work to be done. Injustice doesn't disappear overnight, and progress isn't a straight line. It requires all of us to keep fighting, to keep pushing, and to keep believing in what's possible." The crowd erupted into applause, their energy palpable. Naomi took a deep breath, her gaze sweeping over the faces of those who had stood by her side. She felt a surge of pride, not just in what they had accomplished, but in the strength and unity of the community she called home. Closing the chapter. As the crowd began to disperse, Mitchell approached, his expression a mix of exhaustion and satisfaction. "Well," he said, "we did it." Naomi smiled, the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. "We did, but there's more to do." "Always is," Mitchell replied. "But I have a feeling you're not done making waves." Naomi laughed softly, the sound light but filled with determination. "Not even close." As the night fell and the stars began to appear, Naomi stood alone for a moment, looking up at the sky. She thought about the challenges she had faced, the people she had inspired, and the battles that still lay ahead. The road wasn't easy, but it was one she was proud to walk. In the quiet of that moment, Naomi whispered to herself, a promise as much as a reflection. "This is only the beginning."